coming to lesson number 11 in this series called Holy, Holy, Holy. And today, because it's the fifth Sunday, our children are staying in here with us, so I'm going to try to help them understand what we're talking about as well as you. And I want to talk about holy heroes. A hero is a person who is admired, idealized for courage, outstanding achievements, or notable qualities. Not to be confused with famous, not to be confused with people we just swoon over because they're pretty or because they can do one thing well. I'm talking about people who have courage, outstanding achievements, and noble qualities. And my life has been full of heroes. My mom and my dad, my pastors, Sunday school teachers, school teachers, people in this room are heroes to me. There are people in this room who've changed my life. I look up to, I admire my wife and elders and deacons and people who come at 8:30 and start the media up, people who come over here to the church during the week and volunteer their time. People who don't have a lot of money but still finance what God is doing in the earth. You may have noticed this. It's not the millionaires who finance the church. But God doesn't really need the millionaires. He wants people who buy into what He is doing. And so some of you who think being a hero is the furthest thing from your mind, I feel like God wants to say to you today, there's some heroic in all of us. And you aren't necessarily the loser that you think you are. There are times when I have found out that some of my heroes had flaws. And it devastated me. Until I realized that there are no perfect heroes. I discovered that I can't be perfect. I know that surprises you, but I can be brave sometimes. I can be faithful. I can be obedient. I can be kind. And so can you. So help me with this. If we were in Sunday school class, there'd be an interaction. So help me with this. Name some of those holy heroes that are mentioned in the Bible. Call out some names. David, Moses, Elijah, John the Baptist, Noah. Holy heroes. And the Bible was written, and their stories are captured there. And I want to look at a couple scriptures that put this in balance for us. The first one's in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 7. It says, Paul talking, who was a hero, we now have this light shining in our hearts, but we ourselves are like fragile clay jars containing this great treasure. This makes it clear that our great power is from God and not from ourselves. You are a hero when godly qualities are exhibited in your life, but you're a fragile clay pot too. So, holy, holy, holy. I have holes, I have fragileness, I have clayness, but with His holiness, He comes and makes me more whole. Another verse from 1 Corinthians 15, Paul speaking again, for I'm the least of all the apostles. In fact, I'm not even worthy to be called an apostle after the way I persecuted the church. Most of you remember his story. Paul killed Christians before his conversion. He said, but whatever I am now, it's all because God poured out His special favor on me, and not without results. For I've worked harder than any other apostles, yet it was not I, but God who was working through me by His grace. And then there's another verse that helps us in 2 Corinthians. So we don't look at our troubles we can see now. We don't look at our holiness, Holey. We don't focus on our fragile clay pots. Rather, we fix our gaze on things that cannot be seen. For the things we see now will soon be gone, but the things we cannot see will last forever. We talked about that last week. It's all about God, and sometimes I have to flip this thing. Instead of me trying to be a hero, I need to let Him be a hero through me. And as God challenges you to become whole, I think it's important that you keep this in perspective. He's not asking you to be perfect. He's not asking you to pony up and try harder. You know, how many times can you try twice as hard? After a while, you tried as hard as you can, but maybe you're trying too hard in your power, and maybe you just need to let God make you the hero that He's called you to be. Let's ask for His help. Lord, I pray that you would be with us today, that you would talk to our hearts and our minds, that you would free us up from some thinking, that you would give us godly thinking. You would help these men and women who you've called, help them become all you've called them to be, in Jesus' name. Amen. You may be seated. When I say hero today, I'm talking male and female. But I want to start with this. A lot of times we get things in our head, we get mindsets, and sometimes they're not true. For example, there's probably some people in this room who have this mindset about themselves that says something like this: everyone is a party animal but me. Or everyone seems to just love Jesus and pray with no problem. Or nobody else has any worries. I go to church and they're all smiling. Or they don't have problems in their household like I have problems in my household. Or nobody seems to struggle with temptations like I struggle with temptations. That's probably bad thinking. Because this room is full of heroic people. This room is full of fragile clay pots. Somehow I have to learn to live life as this fragile clay pot with this treasure of God in me. And I've just got to figure out how to keep that treasure flowing, knowing I'll always be a fragile clay pot. However, that flowing treasure will make me a better clay pot. And God will seal up some of those holes. And He'll make my life more complete. And a lot of times, for example, when God helps me quit sinning, it's not like, now I'm super holy. It's more like, my life is better. Every time God helps me overcome a sin, my life is blessed. It's not like God is up there wanting me to be this perfect non-sinner. He knows I'm holy, Holey. So we get these mindsets, and I'm going to prove to you that you probably have some misconceptions in your head because of things you've heard over the years. For example, if you listen to the news tries to frame everything, and it does a pretty good job of making people think things. So a lot of people have these mindsets that were given to them by the major broadcasters or by Hollywood or by their educators or somewhere they picked up these mindsets that might not even be true. So here's a little simple test I'm going to give you. I'm going to show you a chart. And just from what you've seen in the news and so forth, I want you to guess like these people did. This was a survey given by YouGov.org. And they asked Americans, what percent of America do you think is Muslim, Jewish, Native American, Asian, Black, LGBTQ? And those numbers to the left are percentage. So when they guessed, America at large thought we had probably a population of 25% Muslim or 30, almost 30% Jewish. Just look at all those, all right? Now, I'd like you to guess. What percent, just in your mind, would you be up with those or a little lower than those or way lower than those? What percent of Americans are really Jewish? What percent are really Asian? And this is, I'm not being in any way derogatory against minorities. It's just, after a while, because some news stories and some policies and some things are focused on, before you know it, they're so big in your mind that you think there's a lot of that. Right? Now let me show you the actual statistics according to YouGov.org. Blue is what everybody was thinking. Orange is really what is. And if you're thinking blue and orange is reality, you're not being real. And so like that last category, they're the noisiest. And everybody thinks there's a lot of them. But 5% of the population can make our schools change their policy. Because news puts them up there and everybody thinks that way. And the Muslim population, for example, not all Muslims are some would just say that they're Muslim by race, not by belief. But look how small that is. That's like 2%. And yet, right now, there's one of our parties that is bowing to these 2% and what they think about Israel. Why? Because somehow people's perceptions are wrong. They're thinking there's this many people and there's this big of a problem when it's really not even true. Now, I show that to you because it's easy for us to look at them and say, oh, they don't have good mindsets. But I'm here to say your mindsets can be off too. And sometimes you can be thinking up here when reality is really down here. You may think that you're a perfect person, when reality, or you might think that you're a complete loser, when in reality, and God comes along and says, you're not whole, you've got an issue, you've been hurt, you've got these things going in your life, and because of that, your perception is off. You think you're a loser, but you're not a loser. You think you're broken, but you're not necessarily as broken as you think you are. So you need to start believing in what I'm going to do in your life. You're not as good as you think you are sometimes. You're not as bad as you think you are sometimes. And right there in the middle somewhere, in that boring, balanced middle, there's life and there's joy and there's peace and there's goodness in our lives. Some of these concepts that we get, sometimes we get them because we want to think them. Sometimes we get them because someone in our life kept speaking them into our lives. Sometimes we get them because we were bullied. Sometimes we get them because of a cataclysmic abuse or some accident or a divorce or something like that comes along, and it's so jarring that it just seals a mindset that God Himself can't even change sometimes. And some of you have been awakened. God is trying to wake some of you to reality. You're not as bad as you think. You're not as good as you think. You're not a loser. I've got stuff for you. So when God comes along, He fixes the mindsets. He doesn't even necessarily need to change much. He fixes your mindsets. And when you just start thinking straight, you're not as upset. You're not as open to bad feelings. You're not as messed up as you think you are. God's heroes in the Bible were heroes, but they weren't perfect. Their human qualities didn't stop God from using them. And neither will yours. Most of you can list by memory your 5 major problems, your shortcomings. And God comes along and He says in a sermon, or He says in a scripture, or He might even give you direct prophecy and say, I'm going to use you in a mighty way. And your mindset says, Nying. Like Gideon's, I am not a mighty man of valor. Like Moses, I can't even speak. God, you can't use me. And God says, I know you're fragile, but this is how I want to do it. I find fragile people, and when they'll start believing in what I'm going to do in their life, I do awesome things through them. And if they get too high and mighty, I'll take them down a notch or two. Life will take them down a notch or two. But sometimes God's bigger problem is not people who get high and mighty. It's people who won't rise to the occasion and let goodness flow through them, won't let God's love flow through them because their mindset says, God can't use me. I'm a loser. So, Bible heroes, their stories were written in the Bible. They were inspirational stories. They're good qualities that we can rejoice about. We can rejoice about a little shepherd boy who's brave enough to stand up to a giant. We can rejoice about a guy who's strong enough to pray even though there's a law against it. And he's thrown into a lion's den and God protects him from the lions. These courageous people with good qualities, heroes. People worth clapping for. But they weren't perfect. In fact, many of you, if you'll actually read the Bible through, every single chapter, you'll be disappointed. Because all of these great heroes, in fact, there's probably only 2 or 3 of the most popular heroes in the Bible that don't have something bad written about them. So, I'm trying to help you understand. Sometimes we get in our minds, there are these heroic people, and they have faith like Moses, and they build arks like Noah, and they kill giants like David, and I wish I were that guy. I wish I could be that way. But I can't. I'll let Brother Hanson or some elder go. I'll let Nathan and Diana go talk to people. But I'm not that heroic. And I'm here to say this room is full of heroes. I'm here to say when God uses fragile clay pots, you will do things you never imagined. Not because you're so good, but because He is so good. You've got to let His goodness flow. If you don't think He's good enough to use you, you'll never be used. You just won't ever enjoy the life that God has for you. You'll never be who God really wanted you to be. So let's be honest here for a few minutes and let's look at these Bible heroes. I'm not going to read all of these, but you can glance down there. Every single Bible hero had a hole. Or their circumstances were less than ideal, like Noah got drunk, right? Jacob lied. Moses murdered. David was a murderer and an adulterer. Jonah ran from God. Peter denied Christ. Zacchaeus was really short. Timothy had an ulcer. And look at the last one. At one point, Lazarus, who became the example of what Jesus could do, raising some from the dead, he had nothing to do with it. He was a corpse. So if you're in this house today and you feel like no better than a corpse, well then I know a mighty God who can raise from the dead. I know a God who can change lives. I know, hey, don't worry about getting a big head. Most people won't let you have a big head for very long. People aren't going to overpraise you for very long. There's a few people who over the years have gotten famous for no good reason, and they're still famous, and I don't even know why the world's so crazy about them. But for the most part, even in secular life, most heroes crash somewhere. And like I was reading about a megachurch pastor. He pastored the largest church in America. And recently, somebody came and accused him of a sexual sin. Whether he hasn't been to trial yet, I don't think, so I don't even know if it's true. But now, this guy who was the best, biggest, greatest pastor in the United States of America, his face is plastered all over the news as a child molester. So be careful what you wish for. I wish I was famous. I wish everybody knew what I was doing. Until somebody gets a hold of that, or until someone tries to attack you. You need to be happy with who you are. You are who you are. You are a fragile clay pot. But God has plans for you. He's trying to make you whole. And in the process of Him making you whole, sometimes He brings up issues. And when He brings up those issues, some of us get sidetracked by them. Jesus came to me and told me I was selfish. It's like, oh, it's going to be so devastating. I might as well just crawl under a rock and never come out again because I'm selfish. No, the only reason He would come to you and point out your selfishness is because He wants to show you how His help is going to make you selfless. So He's helping you to see what He wants to fix in your life, the mindset that He wants to change. So all heroes have holes. And these people knew they had holes. And several of them even said to God, I'm not worthy. And God said, I want to use you anyway. These are heroes because of what God did. They chose to live as heroically as they could, but they knew they were imperfect. So Hebrews said all these people earned a good reputation because of their faith, yet none of them received all that God had promised. So those of you in the room that are perfectionists, I'm talking to you for a minute, right? Perfectionists are people that think if they work hard enough and they double their efforts enough and they're careful enough, they'll finally achieve that place where they don't make any mistakes anymore. Well, I applaud you for trying, because if you weren't trying, you wouldn't be the best you could be. You're supposed to try, but you're never going to reach perfection. You're never going to get it all right. So when you're trying along and you make a little mistake, the enemy and your own perfectionism is right there to accuse you. What do you do at that point? At that point you say, I'm going to still try. I still think I can do better, but it's not by my power. It's not by my might. It's by His Spirit. Like I said last week, so God, you're going to have to help me be better at this point. Heroes right here in this room. Turn to someone and say, you're a hero. Now I'm not trying to make you think this just positive self-esteem thing. Pump yourself up. I'm here to say, if I'll let God, He'll flow even through me. You know, if I have a glass and it's clean, I could give you a cup of tea. No, iced tea. It wouldn't matter if it was plastic. Wouldn't matter if it was cracked as long as it wasn't leaking. It wouldn't matter if it was cloudy. It wouldn't matter if it was glass or tin. It really doesn't matter what the cup is made out of. I could use it to get tea from a pitcher to your mouth. And if you're about to die of thirst, that little cup, no matter how ugly it would be heroic. It doesn't matter how messed up your life has been. It doesn't matter how many scars you have. It doesn't matter how messed up your childhood was. It doesn't matter how bad you feel about yourself. If you can just get a little bit of love to your neighbor, if you can just get a little bit of goodness through your life to somebody else, you're a hero. But I'm fighting your mindset right now, aren't I? You're up here in the blue. I'm down here in the orange. You're blood bought. You're washed. You're holy because He makes you holy. You're good because He makes you good. But there's these things in our mind that we're bound by. We're still slaves to these mindsets. And God comes and tries to make us free from them. Let me see if I can explain this in a secular sense, all right? How many of you are familiar with John Paul Jones? If you were to go to Annapolis, Maryland, to the Naval Academy as a new recruit, the first thing they would do would take you to the chapel. And down in the innards of that chapel is a crypt, an underground room. And in that room are the remains of John Paul Jones. And they would say, this is who is considered the father of our Navy. And there'll be a quote somewhere. What's that quote? I have not yet begun to fight. John Paul Jones, I have not... A Revolutionary War hero. I have not yet begun to fight. And I think it's good that he's a hero. But I like to read from a book called To Risk It All by Admiral James Stavridis. He writes this: "As I matured and learned more about this complicated, difficult sailor and sea captain, my initial admiration for his legend diminished somewhat. I began to understand the dark side of John Paul Jones, the immense vanity, deep insecurity, and enormous ambition that drove this gardener's son, who seemed cursed with an inferiority complex. He had a vicious temper that would flare often at sea, and his men at times suffered as a result. Jones, who lacked the ability to inspire his subordinates and build a band of brothers who could fight together and win decisively, ended his days as a broken man, nearly destitute, living a hard-scrabble existence in Paris, and dying at the age of 45, a largely unmourned and forgotten figure." Now, I didn't think that about John Paul Jones, did you? He was about 5'6". He was a fighter. But he never married. He went from relationship to relationship. He was born in 1747. His name was John Paul Jr. But as a captain early on, he had an insubordinate sailor, and he wanted to discipline him, so he had him flogged. And he had him flogged so much, the sailor died. So he went to court, and they exonerated him, but everybody thought of John Paul Jr. as this bad sea captain. So he moved, and he changed his name by adding Jones, John Paul Jones. In 1775, the United States was just trying to gain its independence from Great Britain, and they started the Marines and the Navy at the same time. And they were looking for volunteers. And John Paul Jones volunteered to be the captain of a ship. And he had another ship, and then his third ship was named Bonhomme Richard, and that's what he was assigned to in 1779. Well, in 1779, he was over near Britain, and he was with two other boats. He was supposed to be the lead captain, and they were patrolling. And they came on this convoy of British ships that had timber and iron, things for the war on it. And they were being protected by two destroyers. He was outnumbered. The destroyers were bigger, but he had an attitude. He said, "We're going after these guys." So he attacked these two destroyers who had every advantage. Well, the guys he was leading, the two other ships, weren't even listening to his instructions. In fact, at one time, one of the ships fired and hit him. And it got so bad that eventually he was in a place where everybody in their right mind would have surrendered. And the British destroyer captain got a message to him to say, "Do you surrender?" He had lost half of his crew. By the time he was done, the ship would go down. But at that point, he said something on the order, probably with expletives, "I have not yet begun to fight." And because he had the guts to stand up to these destroyers, even when he lost half his crew and his ship, he got one of the captains to surrender. And it became the highlight of his career. And everyone said, "Well, that's how you do it. There's some courage. There's a guy who didn't give up when things got bad. There's a guy, it didn't matter he lost his ship. It didn't matter half his crew was gone. There's a guy with courage." And he became a hero. And guess what? He deserved a little bit of applause for that. He deserved to be a hero in a way for that. But again, there's holes in that. After that war, he actually went and fought for Russia as a captain. And then he ended up as I already read, in Paris, where he died at 45. Forgotten. And then in 1906, Theodore Roosevelt made him a hero. He read his story. He was so taken with this braveness, and Teddy was one of those kind of guys too, that he had his remains dug up in Paris and moved to Annapolis, Maryland. And people began to celebrate. I have not yet begun to fight. Again, Stavridis says this: no matter how history regards John Paul Jones and ultimately measures his qualities of the leader, mariner, and tactician, it's the singular decision he made off Flamborough Head, that's where they were fighting, to continue a seemingly lost battle for which he will be principally remembered. His ship was clearly sinking under his feet, nearly half his crew killed and wounded, his small flotilla confused and pouring in friendly fire, and his sailors so demoralized as to attempt to surrender the ship without his consent. Yet despite all of this, in an era there was no shame in surrendering to a more powerful foe, which Serapis, that's the name of the boat he got to surrender, clearly represented, Jones chose to reply defiantly and fight on. Throughout his life, he was a scrappy, undersized fighter who was unwilling to let a larger and better endowed opponent defeat him. Jones suffered from a common complex that many small men have, which is that they're driven by the need to show themselves as big as anyone. The son of a blue-collar gardener who saw himself as a gentleman sea captain and maritime warrior, Jones was truly loath to lose a fight to an elegant British sea captain. Insecurity is a spur that drives many people, and the need to prove oneself is often buried deep. And Jones' early years seemed to put a big smoking hole in his side, and he spent the entire rest of his life trying to fill it with women conquered, sea battles won, commands undertaken, floodings given, and titles bestowed. Yet the hole was never filled, and never is, and the decision to fight on in a hopeless moment was a manifestation of his psychology more than the brilliant tactical calculus. There were deep personal psychological currents coursing through Jones, and a lethal combat scenario brought those two before, leading to a vivid decision to say no to surrendering the ship. Now let me explain something. America was founded by heroes. Heroes that prayed like George Washington the first day that they were elected. They led a prayer meeting. They took everybody after they were sworn into office, and they had a prayer meeting. Men who wrote into the Constitution that we have a sovereign God. Heroes who wrote a Constitution that has just blown the world up, that has made one of the greatest nations, most productive nations in the world. But each one of those heroes had holes. And over the years, people have found those holes. And nowadays, almost everybody who's been a hero has been torn down, including their statues. And so people have tried to destroy America by destroying its heroes. Oh, they were good there, but they have this problem. They were good there, but they have this problem. There's not a person alive that doesn't have a hole. There's not a hero alive or dead that doesn't have a hole somewhere. In the Bible, and the only one who didn't have a hole was Jesus Christ himself. Everybody else has had a hole. We have to be careful not to tear down our heroes just because we see that they have a problem. My mom and dad had problems. My pastors have had problems. I've had problems. I've had family members that have problems, but that doesn't keep God from doing good things through them. The people in this room, the heroes that I was talking about earlier, they have their issues. Everybody in this room has their issues, but we need to celebrate the heroes. We need to celebrate the goodness that's in people, and you need to stand to the occasion, and even if it's for not perfect reasons. Maybe like John Paul Jones, maybe you're defiant because you got a little bit of an attitude because you were picked on as a kid. Well, at least there's a little bit of courage there. At least you're standing up for the right thing. It doesn't matter if you're not doing this perfectly. Stand up for who you are. Be who God has called you to be. God is trying to make you whole. Whole just means you don't have a lot of mental hang-ups, a lot of mindsets that keep you from letting God use you in a mighty way. Try it again. Turn to your neighbor and say, you're a hero. Now, you may have heard the adage, your attitude is more important than your aptitude. How you're thinking is more important than what you know. Here's another adage from Proverbs. For the despondent, every day brings trouble. For the happy heart, life is a continual feast. Now again, for our younger members here, what does despondent mean? Some adult, turn to someone who's younger than you and tell them what despondent means. That might be kind of tough even for us, huh? How about gloomy people are going to have a troubled life? If you're gloomy, if you're negative, ain't nobody can help you. God Himself can't help you. But the happy heart, for the happy heart, life is a continual feast. You want to be miserable? You want to be happy? Yeah, but you don't know my situation. I don't know your situation. I probably don't know everything about you. I don't want to know everything about you. I know a God who's good. He's good to the weak-minded. He's good to the smart. He's good to the OCD. He's good to the people who don't know what they're going to do in their future. He's good to the people who've been hurt. He's good to the singles. He's good to the married. He's good to the divorced. He's good to everybody. It doesn't really matter. Are you going to be despondent and let life just bring trouble? What are you focused on? What is your brain bringing into your life? If you're heavy, you'll probably surf the net looking for all the negative news. Oh yeah. Or if you don't like a certain politician, you'll gravitate to every bad clip about that politician. Before you know it, he's the devil incarnate, and you just think that he's going to kill everybody and the whole world's going to hell in a handbasket. Or you can say, I don't know how God's going to fix all this, but He's got a plan, and He's going to use me. And America may not be at its best right now. America might have holes, but my God, He can come into this fragile country. He can come into this messed up New England. He can come up into my family that's all messed up, and God can do something good. Am I going to be happy and believe in that, or am I going to look at everybody's problem? Oh, I've got a horrible family. I got an uncle that he served time, and I got another uncle. He's just wacky sometimes, and that guy has PTSD. And before you know it, your whole family and everybody you know is such a sorry bunch of people that no wonder you're depressed. Or you can see there's a guy who stood up. There's a guy who could have just quit, and he didn't. There's a lady whose husband left her, and she still raised her kids. And maybe she didn't have a lot of money, and maybe she had to work 2 jobs and couldn't really oversee the kids like other people could. But at least she stuck with it. At least she had some tenacity. At least and celebrate the courage, celebrate the desirable qualities in her. So let's go back to our texts. We have the shining light in our hearts. But I'm a fragile clay pot. This treasure, this God in me is what makes me heroic. I am the least of the apostles. I am the least of the preachers. I am the least in this room. I am the chiefest of sinners. But you know what? He's forgiven me. Probably more than all of you put together. I'm so glad that He's forgiven me. I'm going to live forgiven. I'm going to think forgiven. I'm going to enjoy being forgiven. You can focus on everything I did wrong, but God's not focusing on that anymore because I repented of all that. I've given all that to Him. I moved on. I'm beyond all of that. That's how you live whole. Well, Brother Hanson, you're just ignoring some things. Yes, I am. I'm focusing on what He's doing. I'm not completely ignoring it. In fact, you're not whole if you ignore. It wouldn't be a good way to say it. I'm not ignoring all of that. I'm just putting it in its place. I'm recognizing I got issues. I'm asking God for help with those issues. I've asked Him to forgive me of some of those issues. Those issues are probably going to come up again sometime. I'm not pretending I don't have issues. I just know where my help comes from. And every time I have an issue, I go to my help. And I'm happy today being imperfect. I'm not going to be perfect until I get to heaven. Sorry. You're going to have a holy, Holey pastor until I'm no longer your pastor. Now, you can see the holes in me, get mad and go somewhere else, But I challenge you to find a pastor who's not holy, Holey. I challenge you to find a church that's not Holey. But we know that. So we don't look at the troubles we can see. We focus on what we can't see. So God has told us that in this region, we prayed about it in leadership a couple weeks ago. In this region, especially New England, there are some major issues that have kept people bound over the years. He named them one time through the gifts of the Spirit. He said there's brooding. A lot of people brood in New England. There's a lot of mistrust and isolationism. People don't want to mix. There's lust. There's fear of what other people think. There's depression. And all of that is really thick in New England. It's elsewhere too, but God has told us those things are here. And He's told us that we needed to pray about it. But then He's told us that He wants to give us authority over it. Well, how do you have authority over brooding? Well, brooding comes knocking on your door and you say, I used to think I had to open the door to you, but now I know better, so I'm just not going to open the door to that today. I feel like spending the day crying in my beer, but I'm not going to do that anymore because I have this treasure that I can call on. God, come to this broken vessel that wants to brood and help me not brood today. Lord, I don't even really... I want to brood, God, but help me not want to brood so I can be whole. So let me give you, before we come to the altar, some tips for keeping a happy heart. Because if you want a despondent heart, you can get all the magazines and you can go all over the internet getting all the power of positive thinking preachers and teachers, and nothing will break that despondency. Only Jesus can break that. How do you break it? You celebrate God. When we came in here this morning, we started singing songs about our God. We said He was on the throne. We said He was El Shaddai. He's going to take care of me. We spoke the truth, right? We didn't say that because we all came in here feeling like, well, God's got me covered. My life's going wonderful. If I had time to ask everyone in this room about the holes in their life, if I had time for everyone in this room to talk about whether they came in feeling chipper today or not, I would guess half of us were not feeling chipper when they came in here today. So how did we have a happy heart? We started singing the truth. I have a God who takes care of me. I have a God who sits high and lifted. I have a God who loves me. I have a God who can help me through all of this. And I'm not pretending my life is not bad. I'm just looking to the hills from whence cometh my help, as the psalm says. I'm looking to somebody who's bigger than all of this, and that God can help me. And maybe in the past, I didn't really do very good at this. Maybe I haven't been a very good praiser, but I'm going to change that. I'm going to learn how to celebrate God. The second thing you can do to keep a happy heart is celebrate God's people. Look around at these people, because after we're done, on our way out the door, I'm going to ask for, especially those of you who know each other, to go to somebody and tell them why they're a hero. I'm going to ask you to go find somebody and tell them something that you see in them that's good. I would say most people, I'm guessing, most people have this ability to pick out the bad in other people rather than the good. There are a few of us that are odiotic. We're like Odie, we see the good in everything. But most people are more like Garfield. And they pick out the bad. So they go to church and it's like, well, she's over there worshiping, but I know this about her and I know this about him. Well, you just go ahead and be despondent if you want to. You just go ahead and live a miserable life. You just go ahead and criticize everybody else if you want to. But I'm going to look to those people to be full of God. I'm going to rejoice. They're probably not nearly as in bad a shape as they would be without Jesus. I'm so glad that Jesus is coming to their life. I'm so glad. Well, that lady snapped at her kids. Well, she probably shouldn't snap quite that way. But, her dad may have beat her. God came along and took her to a better level. No, she's not perfect, but she's probably not where she used to be. Why can't we look at that? Why can't we see the hero? Why can't we see the good in people? If we take all our heroes down, we're miserable. And we've made ourselves miserable. And last and hardest is celebrate what God is doing in your life. If I were to come to you right now and say, what's so good about you? Immediately your brain says, well, that would be proud to say what's good about me. So maybe I should say it different. What is God doing good in your life? Well, you know what? I really felt like flipping off that driver, and I didn't do it. Well, it's like, I can't pat myself on the back for that. No, you can't pat yourself on the back, but you can thank God that you didn't do something stupid. You might have got him to pull his revolver out and blow you away. You're probably blessed that you didn't flip him off. You have holes, but God can make a difference. I'm not giving you a pass to do whatever you want to do, but sometimes we Christians and we preachers are so afraid that if we say anything good about you, you're going to just forget trying to be good, that we don't say enough good about you. Parents, you do this too. I can't tell my kids that they did a good job with that, because then they're going to think, I don't even need to clean my room tomorrow. So I better nag. And I better nag some more. I better keep telling them what they're doing wrong. And so some of our homes, some of you have trouble thinking well about yourself because that's the home you grew up in. Nag, 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 nag. Never enough, never enough, never enough. Churches can be that way, but God is not that way. God comes along and says, you didn't do too well, but let me help you with that. If you'll really let go of that to me, I'm going to fix that in your life. If you'll stop thinking that way about yourself, I'm going to help you not be that way. So you need to start celebrating when God is successful in your life. If you've been trying to pray and you made a commitment, I'm going to pray 20 minutes every single morning, and you only got 3 mornings out of the week, don't focus on the 4 that you missed. Focus on the 3 that you made. Say, I made it 3 days. I can do probably 4. And I'm so glad that I was able to do those 3. And I'm looking forward to being able to do it even more. But I'm not anything but a broken vessel. And if I'll get 5 next week, it's only because God's been good to me. Would you stand? As you know, I'm not satisfied with just theory. I want us to bring this home to roost. We're not going to be perfect until we get to heaven. And only God can unscramble my brain. And only God can unscramble my heart. So, for example, if I have a selfish motive, a hole, if I'm selfish, well, I'm probably not selfish about absolutely everything. And I'm probably not a complete loser. I just have a selfish thing going on down there. So God's light comes and shines into my heart, and I start seeing my selfishness. And if I'm not balanced, if I'm not stable, if I don't understand the concept I'm talking about here today, when I see that hole, I can become completely deflated. I've been trying for 40, 50 years to not be selfish, and there it is, I'm selfish. I give up. In other words, you have to be a little bit healthy. You have to be thinking a little bit straight for God to make you whole. And when He shows you your selfishness, you also need to see His goodness. You also need to see all the other things that He's healed in your life. So I'm going to invite you, if you would, all of you who will, come to the front. We're going to close. And well, as we do, all of our the kids and young people, I'd like for you to come up with your parent or with another adult. I'd like everyone who's like youth and below to be next to an adult who's older than 18. Everyone under 18, team up with somebody over 18. because they're going to pray for you in just a minute. If you know of a hole, God only showed it to you so He could close it up. If God came along as inspector and said, you have a broken basement window, it's not time to say, might as well just get rid of the house. No, he told you about the broken basement window because if you'll fix that thing, it's probably only going to cost you, if you do it yourself, you can probably do it for $20, maybe 50. But it'll keep the rats out. It'll keep the thieves from crawling in there. It'll keep the weather out. And if we keep the rain and the rats out, it'll save you from your whole structure being destroyed by water or stuff like that getting in. So let's just fix that thing. And when that's fixed, you have one less place for cold air to come in, one less place for rats to get in, one less place for the water to come in your house. Got that fixed? Well, let's move over here. Let's work on that. If I'm thin-skinned, if I'm weak-minded, if I'm too hurt, every time God puts His finger on something, I collapse. But if I trust Him, say, okay, God, great. You did good with the window. Let's do that. You did a great remodel in the living room. How about the dining room? And boy, it really turned out, you took care of the roof, took a lot of money. Doesn't look a lot different, but now there's no drips in the ceiling. Now, why don't we put some new flooring in? That'll look nicer. I'm talking to people who feel like failures. Talking to people who for years in your brain, the blue said, I'm never going to be spiritual. I'm always going to struggle with this temptation. I'm never going to overcome this addiction. I've tried and I tried and I tried and I tried, and I'm never going to do it. I might as well not even think about it. And God is coming to you to say, no, you aren't, but I am. I still believe that I can do that in you. And if I can get you to believe that, if I can get you to quit believing the accuser's voice, if I can get you to believe in what I can do in people, I can take a Paul who is a murderer and I can make him the most prolific writer of the Bible. I can take a Moses who, when he tried to do it himself, he murdered. And I can turn him into the greatest deliverer and the most iconic name in all of history. That's what I do when I come to these clay, fragile pots. So I'm going to ask you who paired up as an adult, if you'll pray for this younger person. First of all, if they have any mindsets that God needs to fix, they've already got mindsets that God needs to fix. But also pray that they don't get mindsets that hold them back. Pray that their family could do well and the church can do well. And imperfect parents and imperfect teachers can be heroes in their life. And we can have an atmosphere at Acts II Ministries where we all know we have holes. It doesn't take anybody with any amount of brains to find holes. We're looking for people of faith who can see the good in other people. We're looking for people who can see the God in other people. We know anybody can find the other junk. You don't have to be bright. You don't have to be insightful. In fact, most of the time, you think you're insightful and you're not. Anybody can criticize. Anybody can find fault. But not very many people can lift their eyes to heaven and see what God is doing in an imperfect world, imperfect family, imperfect church. So we're going to pray for one for another. Those of you who have not teamed up with someone younger than you, I'd like you to find somebody else to pray for in just a minute. However you want to do it, just put your arm around them, or men to men, women to women. If you'll just pray for somebody, that God would heal the holes, and that God would bring out the hero in them, that God would help them to give their little clay pot to Him so He can do something. We're going to believe in each other for a few minutes. You're not praying for yourself. You're going to pray for somebody else. You're going to ask God to make them a hero. You're going to be David's brother praying for David to be a hero. It's rarely done in the Bible. Joseph's brother didn't believe him. Jesus' brothers didn't believe in him. David's brothers didn't believe in him. But we're going to turn that on its head, and we're going to believe in our brothers and our sisters. We're going to pray the best. We're going to pray, God, do the work. In fact, I probably believe in you more than you believe in yourself. And that's why I pray for you. So would you find somebody that you can feel comfortable with? And no pressure. Just find somebody you can pray for right now as my wife begins to lead us in a song. And just pray as she's playing and singing that God would do a work in their life. God, I pray that you would bring out the best in all of your people.